Hi, welcome back to Videos from the Ville. I'm Professor Charles Greenewalt, and this is City Planning. We want to take a look today at the subject of urban design. We find that urban design is nothing more than a focus, an examination on the form of urbanized areas. Simply building, I should say, simply locating a building. Just locating a building in the city is an act of urban design because the building will change and transform the character of the environment. We find the choice is with urban design, do we accept the urban design of a city as we find it, or should we change it? Urban form, you find that there's two levels of human reaction to urbanized environments. And the two levels of human reaction to urbanized environments are a physical reaction, number one, and number two, a psychological or emotional reaction. The physical reaction is determined by, well, how far away does one live from all the different points of human activity. We have to go to school, we have to go to work, we want to play, we're going shopping. How far must we walk to get there? Is it a pleasant walk or not? Is it a dangerous walk or not? And then we have the psychological or emotional impact, and that's determined by the emotions, by the feelings that the city's appearance triggers, by the city's appearance, how we respond to that. And we find that in the 20th century, of course, the item that had the greatest impact on urban design would, of course, have to be the automobile. And here, please follow along very closely on your PowerPoints, and particularly with these photographs. We find that the form of the modern city has been largely shaped by the automobile. And you have some pictures there of some of the construction that has resulted because of the automobile. So in the 20th century, the car has the greatest impact on urban design, and the form of the modern city has been largely determined by the automobile. As we look at the use of the automobile, of course, when we have to consider the use of energy and how does this affect urban design, we find that the technological development that is most likely to have a significant impact on urban design is energy use. Will the city of the future, will it shrink in response to dwindling energy supplies? Will the city of the future become more dense or be dispersed with smaller, more efficient centers? Will other forms of transit eventually replace the car? Will the height of the buildings be controlled to give equal access to give everyone equal access to the sun's energy? Will the height of the buildings be controlled to give everyone equal access to the sun's energy? Now, when we look at image, the one person who has written the most on this issue of urban design and image is Mr. Kevin Lynch, and there's a picture of him in your PowerPoints, and there's a picture of two of his main books. He has become the premier expert in the subject of image for urban design, and image is simply defined as the interaction between the physical form of the city and the people's perception of that form. So image is the interaction between the physical form of the city and people's perception of that form. Image, we find that different aspects of the visual character of a city that influence the mental perception of an environment. What are the aspects of the visual character of a city that will influence how mentally we perceive an environment? Well, we have to look for paths, sidewalks, or roadways. We have to look for edges, the edges of buildings, the edges of neighborhoods. We have to look for nodes or the focal points for areas or neighborhoods. We have to look for districts. We have to look for landmarks, whether it be the Champs-Élysées, whether it be the Washington Monument, whether it be the Arc de Triomphe, but we have to look for landmarks as well. All these things put together image: paths, edges, nodes, districts, and landmarks. Well, what are the elements of urban design? The elements of urban design is really made up of the space around buildings and the space between buildings. And we have both positive form and negative form. Positive form is created by filled space. Negative form is generated by space that's not filled or empty space. So the elements of urban design are the space around and between buildings. Positive form is space that's been filled. Negative form is generated by space that hasn't been filled. We also find that we have a townscape. A townscape is the physical appearance of an urban space. It's the elements and the combination of elements in the city that give people aesthetic satisfaction. When we try to perceive something visually, a visual perception depends on color and hue. A visual perception depends on light surfaces. A visual perception depends on dark surfaces. And a visual perception depends on texture. So you have a visual perception, and you also have to look at a sense of enclosure. Do we feel that we are enclosed by something, that we're part of something or not? Well, as we look at urban design, there are other architectural determinants of urban design. Architectural determinants of urban design. We find the city is formed of what? The city is formed of many buildings, and urban design is concerned with the contribution that each and every one of those buildings makes to the others. So when we look at urban design, we have to look at the buildings, and we have to look at the contribution that each and every building makes to the other buildings. So an architectural determinant of urban design. Other things we find is that buildings are activity generators. Some buildings are going to automatically generate lots of people doing certain things around them, or perhaps not. Buildings can define space. They define space. What spaces are filled, what spaces are empty, how spaces are going to be used. Buildings can be nodes or landmarks. You had, for example, Wat & Shand, the major department store in the center of Lancaster for years and years, and of course now it's the conference center in downtown. But you have buildings as nodes and buildings as landmarks. And then you have buildings as edges and buildings as facades, buildings as a sort of as a front space, and buildings as edges. So, what is the goal of urban design? In the creation of an effective urban design, Kevin Lynch tells us that we want to create an environment without extremes. Doesn't that make sense? Urban design should all be about creating an environment that doesn't have extremes. So Kevin Lynch tells us that what we want to do is we want to create a comfortable environment. We want to create an environment that's not too hot, it's not too cold. An environment that's not too bright, that's not too dark. An environment that's not too loud, an environment that's not too quiet. We want to make extensive use of trees for the control of the climate and control of pollution, for their appearance. So extensive use of trees. We want to have extensive use of fountains. Of course, fountains provide that noise of the water, which can sort of cancel out other less appealing noises. But also, fountains do what? They engage in positive ionization. Positive ionization is they throw water into the air, and when water's thrown into the air, that causes positive ionization, which is simply positive ionization makes people feel good. And lastly, we can have skyways. So Kevin Lynch wants to create a comfortable environment, one that's not too hot or too cold, not too bright or too dark, not too loud or too quiet, has lots of trees, lots of fountains, and uses skyways when necessary to separate pedestrians from vehicular traffic. He believes that it's very important to preserve the urban amenities that we have rather than to remove them. Try to preserve urban amenities that are already there. And this takes us through, that is a quick primer, if you will, on urban design. If you have any more questions, give me a call, shoot me an email, and I will be happy to try to answer any questions that you have on urban design, okay? We're going to go from here to historic preservation and into then transportation, okay?